The Republic has just celebrated the 40th anniversary of the revolution, and all over the world it's been marked by lots of different events. Right? Think tanks have been hosting events such as ourselves. It's the 1,000 op-eds out there. What's the big deal? Why is 40 such an important number?
It's a big deal because for 40 years, every year and every decade that has gone by, people have been wondering if this is the Islamic Republic's last year. And to arrive at 40, I think, marks a big turning point in the history and in the survivability and durability of the Islamic Republic, such that perhaps the leadership in Iran are feeling somewhat buoyed by this birthday. And maybe it's time for the international community to reevaluate its relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Maybe stop calling for the end of the Islamic Republic and instead try to encourage change within the Islamic Republic.
So how have they been celebrating? What have they been doing? What are the sort of the facets of that?
Well, Neil, there have been people have been pouring out onto the streets to listen to speeches by the leadership, specifically Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. There have been demonstrations of Iran's military capability, launching of missiles, and really putting on display their technological abilities, particularly at this moment when Iran is under renewed international pressure, particularly from the United States, another round of nuclear-related sanctions. There have also been travels around the world by Iran's leadership. Foreign Minister Zarif, for example, was just at the Munich Security Conference to make a case for Iran on the international stage and in front of the international community, saying that Iran is a country to be reckoned with, Iran is a great historical civilization, and it's the United States that has a problem with Iran.
I mean, I've been struck. I mean, the issue sort of focusing in around 40 years has really been polarized. You've got people sort of in very distinct camps. They're loving Iran or hating Iran. Can you help us sort of understand why that's the case? How do we sort of navigate? How do we find a point, particularly as a reader, as an analyst? How do we arrive at a point where we have a more nuanced understanding of what's taking place?
I think that Iran is very polarizing, as you said, because its policies in the region and in the international community have been polarizing. Iran has actually chosen to be, taken on polarizing causes and chosen to be polarizing with its independent foreign policy, with its anti-American foreign policy, with its anti-Israeli position. It's positioned itself in this. And there's a very vibrant and engaged Iranian diaspora that would like to see a different Iran, and an Iran that celebrates Iran's history and diversity, and in Iran that is economically stronger than it is today, and in Iran that respects human rights. So you have that camp that I think makes really legitimate demands on Iran. But on the other hand, 40 years on, the Islamic Republic has proved itself to be resilient. And it is not the same Islamic Republic that it was in 1979. It has survived a war. It has evolved in terms of institutions, in terms of leadership, and at an ordinary level, people in Iran have repeatedly demonstrated through their version of elections that they want more integration with the international community, change, they want liberalization, they want greater freedoms. And the Islamic Republic has been trying to manage internal pressure with its own ideology. And observing and witnessing that change is really fascinating, because Iran has a very vibrant young society. It's young in the sense that over 50% is under the age of 30, but it at the same time has a vibrant middle class that wants security and stability. People are looking for jobs and looking for considering the future of their families.
I'd like to pick up on this young thing, because I remember back in '97 when Khatami came in, there was a sense then, at least in the Western press and in the media, was that this was nearly 20 years after the revolution. Iran had a changing demographic. There was this young, buoyant population that really didn't have memory of the revolution. And they were going to be the harbingers of change. And so was Khatami. And this was going to be the big, profound changes that are taking place. But that doesn't seem to have materialized or happened. So when you talk about the youth now, I mean, are we going to see a similar end goal in that it doesn't really advance? Or should we go back to the point where you said over the course of the 40 years, it has evolved, it has changed? How do you sort of see the youth playing a role in driving the country somewhere?
Well, they have been driving the car, but they haven't managed necessarily to reach their end goal. Right. And this is a bit of the tug and pull going on between state and society, where both effectively recognize the limitations of the other. And they're at a standstill point right now. So that you had the reforms of Mohammad Khatami in the 90s. You then had a backlash to those reforms and a sort of frustration with the failed promises of Khatami. He didn't manage to bring about the press freedoms and the liberalizations, and people became apathetic.
Can I ask why not? How come he couldn't deliver?
I think that's a good question, because Khatami's failures are the same as Rouhani's failures today. Iran's system is deeply factional, and the elite are very much divided on what the future of the Islamic Republic should look like. And they've been divided now for 20 years, where you have pragmatists and reformists who would like to see change from within, and you have conservatives and principalists really trying to hold fast and hard to the ideology of 1979, very much fearful that change from within is going to destroy the Islamic Republic, akin to the changes that took place in the Soviet Union, where perhaps perestroika and glasnost together brought down that big empire. So
how does the JCPOA sort of fit into this? I mean, the US is withdrawn from the JCPOA. It's on life support. I believe or understand that Rouhani has, as you've alluded to, has been unable to deliver on the promises. What does that mean really going forward, and what does that mean for the JCPOA too?
Very big questions. I think this is sort of the tragedy of the JCPOA, and it's a tragedy for most ordinary Iranians, because Hassan Rouhani won 2 elections with overwhelming support, because ordinary Iranians really wanted international and economic and political integration. And the JCPOA was meant to deliver that. Maybe not immediately, but over time. And of course, the international community hoped that this transactional agreement would lead to a transformational change in Iran's behavior and foreign policy. And effectively, neither of those objectives have been achieved, either for the international community or for ordinary Iranians. But the JCPOA is really important to this story, because that's what ordinary Iranians want. And for Iran to survive, if you consider its demography, if you consider its youthful population, and if you consider that unemployment is a really important challenge for the Islamic Republic, and particularly youth unemployment, which is estimated to be officially about 20%, that is a ticking time bomb. And without integration, without economic investment from the international community, without new technology, Iran isn't going to be able to achieve those economic objectives.
And if it can't achieve those economic objectives, why would it continue to sort of pursue an aggressive foreign policy throughout the region, which seems to be a bugbear naturally for the neighbors, for the US and for the Europeans? That seems to be wanting 2 very different things at the same time.
Yes, they want to have their cake and eat it too. And ultimately, I think the biggest challenge going forward for the leadership of the Islamic Republic is, are they going to marry their economic objectives with their foreign policy objectives? For the past 40 years, they've been separate, and they have not worked in tandem with each other. And this is why we are in this standoff with regards to the JCPOA, because those transformational changes didn't take place, and Iran continues to want to pursue an ideological and independent foreign policy rather than marrying its national and economic interests together. So as the JCPOA is in this fragile moment, Iran is under deep economic and political pressure, and is looking to its partnerships and relationships built over the 10-year negotiating period of the JCPOA with the European Union, with the E3, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, with Russia and China, with India, with Turkey, to provide Iran with enough of a band-aid or enough of a cover economically to keep the economy alive while it sort of weighs out its options.
So whilst it's weighing out its options and the economy is really, really squeezed, if President Trump comes along and says, I want a big deal, let's have a grand bargain, your economy can be revived, I want you to fill in points A, B, C, and D, would the Iranians come forward for that now? Would they feel that they've been so sufficiently squeezed? Would they respond positively to an overture? We've already heard President Trump say, there's a place at the table if he wants to negotiate with Mr. Rouhani.
That appears to be the American endgame. The Iranians have not decided if that is their endgame just yet. And they're weighing out their options, really, because the issue is personal at this point. Trump's strategy of maximum pressure is debilitating, but it's personal. Trump's allies have equated Iran's leadership to Hitler, have accused Iran of being akin to Hitler and the Third Reich, and this is very hard to walk back from for the leadership as well. And so right now it appears that they are going to try and wait it out until 2020 to see if the Trump administration is indeed going to survive or be reelected. But they also want to see if they can survive and how well they can survive.
Right.
And this period is really important as a period of leverage building. And Iran doesn't want to come back to a negotiating table from a place of weakness. They want to be there as equals so that they can negotiate on equal terms and not have to concede on all of these demands that have been imposed upon them.
So how are they acquiring that leverage? What are the methods for doing that? So building up that political capital, if you like, that they can spend maybe in 2 years' time?
I think they have a number of strategies. First is internal. There is an internal debate taking place on what the strategy from Iran's side is. And so they do need to be unified on that internal policy approach. They're also trying to build bridges between the leadership and the people. And of course, there is a bit of a legitimacy crisis in Iran, to put it mildly.
Sorry, can I just butt in? Can I ask you about the protests? I mean,
Yes.
we've had a series of protests for the last, whatever it is, 18 months, and
Yes.
they seem to sort of peak and trough, but are they significant? Are they serious? Are they something that the government really needs to take into account?
Yes, they are serious because they're very much driven by economic grievances above all, although there have been concerns about leadership and governance. There have been concerns about Iran's foreign policy as well expressed. And these protests were ultimately spontaneous and that's sort of morphed and spread without leadership. So that is a problem for the Islamic Republic. But they weren't the same as the 2009 protests, which emerged after the 2009 elections. And those elections were much more threatening because it brought out a wider constituency of Iranians in Tehran. 3 million Iranians were reported to be out protesting for a very long period of time. But if you take all of these signposts of public demonstrations and you put them together, it's clear that ordinary Iranians want something different than what the Islamic Republic is giving them. And so this dance that's taking place, this back and forth, is really important. The government has to try to address those concerns and try to increase their buy-in with the people that are very frustrated, worried and concerned about their future livelihoods, and perhaps feeling abandoned by the international community, and particularly the United States, when they had signed on to a deal that they are indeed in compliance with. So, it's a bit of a dichotomy. So this buy-in right now, or this is an opportunity for the Iranian government to try and increase support within the population using nationalist rhetoric and ideology to create some unity inside Iran. But to answer your question, there are also other tools, not so positive tools or leverage that they're trying to obtain. It's their relationship in the region that is particularly useful. They have deep ties in Iraq, in Syria. They're building those and trying to leverage those relationships, demonstrating their relevance in the Astana peace process with Putin and Erdogan. They have long-standing ties with Hezbollah, and they have the ability to threaten the United States in multiple theaters in the region, as well as Israel. They have been accused of cyber crimes, and cyber terrorism has apparently stepped up. There is threats of closing the Straits of Hormuz, and all of these are sort of incremental efforts at demonstrating to the United States, but also to Europe and other members of the international community, that Iran actually has some jokers in its deck, and it's willing to play it alongside the ballistic missile program. Let's not forget that.
And how does, finally, how does Iran see itself in the region, and where does it want to be? I mean, it seems to have really frustrated, spoiled relations with most of the neighbors, in the region. Where does it see itself fitting? Where's its future? I mean, it's 40 years of struggle, it seems, domestic, internal struggle in the region, struggle with the US. When is it going to sort of rest and say, okay, this is where we sit in the region, we've achieved our goal?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I look at Iran, the Islamic Republic's history in the region is very tormented. It's been isolated from the beginning in reaction to the revolution, its own policies of trying to export the revolution because of the Iran-Iraq war. And that period, that first decade, very much formed the worldview of a lot of the leadership. It made it very paranoid and defensive, and it's that period where Iran developed this strategy of supporting non-state actors. It only became successful as a strategy much later, after the 2006 Hezbollah war, for example. But this tormented relationship continues because, on the one hand, Iran is an outsider. It's a Persian state in the Middle East, surrounded by Arabs. It's Shia, surrounded by Sunnis, and so it's awkward, and it's not comfortable with its positioning. And it's tried to overcome this awkwardness by taking on policies that seem also rather unnatural. For example, the support of the Palestinian cause is anti-Israel animus, for example, is designed to ingratiate Iran with local streets around the Middle East. It hasn't quite necessarily worked, and in effect, Iran has had more successful sectarian relationships. But that also has had blowback for Tehran, because the reputational damage of developing and cultivating Shia militias throughout the region has isolated Iran today. So Iran is in a very awkward place. It's perceived to be very strong, it's perceived to be very strategic and influential, but it remains isolated in its own region. And I think we're at a sort of fork in the road sort of moment where Iran isn't sure about what it wants to be, but it knows that it's very relevant, it knows that it's very strong, and it knows that it's not going anywhere.
That fork in the road is a good place for us to stop. Thanks, Anam. That's been great. Thank you.